Everyone. We are so happy to have you here with us tonight. And we have some items of information about our chapter events that we think might interest you. First of all, we are excited that our native plant sale is coming up very soon. We are selling through an online store this year. The member sales begin on April 23rd, and members will get first choice on plants available. There is still time for you to become a member and receive the member prices if you send your registration within the next few days to wildones.org. If you do this, please send an email to our membership chair, Terry, at our Gmail address, which is ilprairiewo@gmail.com, so she knows to look for your new membership before the 23rd. Sometimes there's a delay in getting those memberships processed, and we want to be sure to know that you have actually turned in your new membership. The public sale begins on May 4th for those of you who are not members, and plant pickup will be May 15th in Carlock, Illinois. And look for more information on our website, illinoisprairie.wildones.org. And all of those those addresses will be in your chat. Now, do you want to learn more about our pollinator pathway and how to improve the availability of native plants for pollinators? You can join our planned live Facebook event with Bill Inks and our Wild Ones Vice President Amy Woodrum at AB Hatchery, and that's going to be at 4 p.m. on April 14th. Members will soon receive a short survey by email. We are interested in learning how the chapter can better serve our members. Plus, we are opening the opportunity to participate in additional chapter activities and want to know what interests you. The link also will be in the upcoming May 1st newsletter. We hope you will make some time to respond. We are holding some member-only field trips in May and June, and there'll be more announced later, but these are just the 2 May and June ones. The schedule is May 8th, Moraine View State Park near Leroy, and that will be led by Jan Turner. And on June 5th, we're going to Nachusa Grasslands, which is just under 2 hours north of Normal. That will be led by our other co-president, Sherry Snyder. And there will be details about both of these in our May 1st newsletter also. Lastly, do you know that we have a members-only Facebook group? Currently, 65 members participate. You can ask questions and offer comments. If you want to join the group, send a request through Facebook. You need a Facebook account to join. The name of our group is Wild Ones, Illinois Prairie Chapter Group. This will be in the chat. Both members and non-members, however, can follow our public Facebook page, which is Wild Ones, Illinois Prairie Chapter. Thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we hope you enjoy our program.
We're happy tonight to have Isa Rydlinski with us. She's an ecologist who gained an appreciation for native plants while working on large-scale restorations. She works on a regional scale and in small urban areas where she collaborates with partners with the goal of improving small green spaces. Isa has been gardening with natives herself for about 10 years, and tonight she'll help us learn some basics for using natives in our own backyards, maybe in a community garden, and even in public spaces. And she's been kind enough to include some plants that we are going to offer in our native plant sale. So look forward to that, and welcome, Isa. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me. It's a beautiful day, so thank you for sitting here instead of walking outdoors and enjoying the weather before it turns to rain in the upcoming hours or days. And so my name's Isa Rydlinski. Thank you for the introductions. I am an ecologist, but I also am an avid gardener. And if you told me 20 years ago, or maybe 30 years ago, that I would be gardening a lot, I would totally roll my eyes, like to the back. Because my grandma would never let me in her garden. She would garden. She had this huge garden. The entire backyard was a garden. but I was never allowed in because she was afraid I'm going to step on her flowers or her radishes or her beets or whatever else. So I hope she's smiling at me from far above, seeing that I have become a gardener and I've been gardening with native plants for a while. So, and I also want to extend a thank you to the Illinois Prairie chapter of the Wild Ones for inviting me here today. I'm really honored to talk to you and to help you do your part to turn Illinois back to being the prairie state. So I'm going to jump right in, and I'm going to talk about a little bit about habitat in urban cities. In case you're still on the fence whether you should be gardening with native plants or not, I'll try to convince you, make a good case for that. We know that as humans living in urban spaces, and urban spaces, could be a huge metropolitan city like Chicago, but it could be smaller cities or even villages around anywhere where there's a human footprint impact. We know that those spaces need nature, and that's for many different reasons. We need nature because when large storms come in, it is nature, it is our wetlands and other natural areas that absorb that water so it doesn't end up in our basements. We know that nature creates cleaner air. It cools our cities when it's really hot because all that cement and asphalt really absorbs the heat and releases it throughout the day and night. But having large natural areas really helps with that. And there's more and more, increasingly more studies that show that green spaces improve mental and physical health. And there's studies that show that kids with ADHD, after spending 30 minutes outdoors, really do a lot better on tasks that need like a lot of cognitive concentration. And I think a lot of us through COVID experienced that ourselves. I know my garden has been a place of healing, both mentally and physically, in the last year. And when I wasn't able to go out in a lot of places, maybe that was the place where my friends came in and we hung out, outdoor distantly, or where I spend a lot of time with my kids, looking at different insects, digging, making mud pies, etc. So we said that cities need nature, but there's an ongoing question whether nature needs cities, right? We mostly think of nature as being out there. So does nature need to be in the cities for nature to thrive? That answer is, the answer to that question is still out there. But, if you think about it, most of the world population lives in the cities. Cities are becoming more and more important corridors for wildlife. And a lot of our cities are situated along rivers or other natural areas. And cities can have really diverse habitats. A study out of LA showed that LA, and I know they're not flat like we are here, but they had 27 different ecosystems within the city boundaries. That was reflected by the types of plants that were found there. So that's fairly impressive. But why people usually think that nature has nothing to do with cities? If you think of cities, you think of what you're seeing here. So this is a screenshot of Chicago with the Field Museum right here, the dot and the Lake Michigan, and it's one of the words. And the red shows impervious surface. So if you look at this, the redder it is, the more impervious surface there is, usually asphalt, cement, some buildings. But this is a resolution by a 30 by 30 meter resolution, so about 100 feet by 100 feet. We looked at this and we're like, hold on, we're right here. We know there's a lot of greenery here. It doesn't pop up. And that's true, because if you look at a much higher resolution, a meter by meter, so 3 feet by 3 feet, you will notice that there is plenty of green space. And this is what we call the grass shrub layer, pretty much your lawns and your trees, areas that are plantable space in a way. And if you remove the red from the, I don't have that slide. If you remove the red from there, you see that there is plenty and plenty of green areas. And we looked at it in context of the monarch butterfly. So many people probably are familiar with the monarch. It's this charismatic butterfly that migrates between Mexico and Canada and back to Mexico or upper Midwest every year. Does it in a few generations, and it needs two different things. As an adult, as a butterfly as we know it, the organism needs nectaring plants to, get nutrients, your carbohydrates, proteins, etc. But as a caterpillar, in its larval stage, it can only feed on milkweeds. So the populations have been decreasing, and U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service said, you know what? We need 1.8 billion with a B stems of milkweed for the population to stabilize. And then they looked at different land use types from national parks, state parks, rights of ways, highways, ag areas. And then they looked at urban areas and they gave them a big 0. And we looked around again and we're like, hold on, there's milkweed. So we looked at this plantable space with the lens of thinking of where can we put more milkweed on the ground, knowing that whatever you do for the monarch butterfly, you also do for a bunch of other pollinators. And we found that a lot of this plantable space in our area is in residential spaces. So you can see here that residential has most and some residential common spaces where the second butterfly is also a good chunk. And that is space that is mostly in lawn. So if you've heard Don Calamy speak, if you haven't, I really recommend that you look up his 2 books. The latest one is Nature's Best Hope. Actually, he has one on oats. But Nature's Best Hope, And he talks about if we converted half of our lawn in the United States into prairie gardens or native gardens, we would have an area 11 times the size of Yellowstone. And wouldn't that be incredible? So he calls it the Homegrown National Park, and it's a movement, and it's a beautiful movement. So what are these native plants that I keep referring to? I talk about prairie plants, native plants. What are they? So they are plants that have evolved here for thousands of years, and they're used to our crazy Illinois weather. They can deal with the heat in July and August, but they can also deal, with the -20 cold. They have usually really deep roots, and they're just used to your surroundings. So, you don't have to, my mom has some plants, non-native plants, in her garden that she digs up every fall, puts in a little container, stores in her garage. And if you open the door to her garage in winter, you're going to get yelled at because her plants are going to get cold. Native plants, you don't have to do that. So other than that lower maintenance part, why should we landscape with native plants? Where they are beautiful. Here you have a picture of blue verbena, Verbena hastata. It's one of those really intricate little plants that I like to put in to fill empty spots or to just have something shoot up and break like a monotonous design in the garden. And this is butterfly weed also being sold at your native plant sale, which we'll talk about later. And adding some native ferns. This is maiden fern. And this is prairie milkweed with that big fat monarch caterpillar eating on it. Just look how beautiful those plants are. One of my favorite, I have many favorites. One of my favorites, this is wild hyacinth, also beautiful late spring blooming flower. Native landscapes create habitat for a lot of our wildlife. And, I'm in Chicago, so sometimes wildlife are our neighbors. But what I mean is our birds, bees, and butterflies. They are giving them food resources. They attract them, and look how beautiful. There's some specialty bees. This is a bee that specializes on the geranium plants. You will attract all that beautiful wildlife to your garden if you plant with native plants. And they help to prevent spread of invasive species. So there's many different reasons why our beautiful prairies are gone. Fragmentation, development are big factors. But those corridors that our highways provide for us, they also provide as corridors to a lot of invasive species, which can take over natural areas So if you're driving around the highway, you see those really, really tall grasses. Those are phragmites. Those are really bad for natural wetlands. Or you see these things that look like an egg on a stick. That's teasel. That's also an invasive species. If you have a strong and resistant and resilient prairie or other natural system, it's going to be much harder for those invasive species to come in and then spread. You will, by having a naturalized garden, connect natural areas and landscapes into corridors, which is beautiful. And it's especially important if you're living by a natural area because you are the buffer. Native plants will absorb excess stormwater and nutrients, and that's for many different reasons. But one of them is those prairie plants, sometimes they're called the upside down rainforest. And that's because most of their biomass is underground. They have these really, really long roots. Some go as long as 8 or more feet down, and they break out the soil. So if you have a compacted urban soil and water falls, if you have just lawn, only about 30% of that water will percolate in, and the rest is runoff. And that will eventually end up in someone's basement if it doesn't move off of the landscape quickly enough. But these plants have a way of growing those roots, breaking up the ground, and also making little tiny holes where the water can come in and infiltrate into the ground. They also replenish our water table, which is an important part because we often do not think of having water crisis because we're in the greater Great Lakes region, but that is a problem. They require less water and fertilizer, so it's again better for our environment because you're not watering, you're not fertilizing, but also saves you money. Improve air quality. It's a beautiful place for children to play. Those are my 2 daughters planting a native garden in the house we moved to about 2 years ago. And they do create gardens that honor our rich natural heritage. And something where we can educate people, educate ourselves, and remember who we are. And they make gardening easier and a little lower maintenance. But I'm not going to say that they make gardening no maintenance because that's just not true. But because they're less finicky, they need a little less hand-holding, if you will. So hopefully now I have convinced you that you should garden with native plants. And I'm gonna walk with you through some basic steps on how to create a native prairie garden. So bear with me here. And the first thing you wanna do when you are starting to get your garden is determine the conditions. You wanna look at the place and ask yourself, is the place where I'm gonna plant, is it shady or is it sunny? And you don't wanna just go out there one day and be like, it's 9 a.m. and it's shady. You want to look at that place throughout the day, but also different seasons, right? Because a place, we just cut out one European high cranberry bush. And my husband's like, oh, this is perfect for your tall grasses. This area is so sunny. And I'm like, right now, because the maple right above it hasn't leafed out. Once that maple leaves out, that place isn't going to be sunny anymore. So look at it, think about it. And if you have a shady area, maybe you'll plant some of these plants that are available at the native plant sale. Wild ginger, bloodroot, or geraniums. I really love geraniums. They have the coolest seeds. The seeds dry up, and then when they're drying out, they're literally catapulted out. They have like a little pouch where the seed sits, and the part of the seed head catapults out and throws the seed out. It's pretty cool. Bloodroots are beautiful. When the leaf is wrapped around the plant, it looks like Superman that's about to go into action. I have weird ways to notice plants. Or maybe you have a sunny spot, and those are the plants on the bottom that will do well in sunny spots. You can have your rosin weeds, your silphiums. That's rough. The middle top one is rough blazing star, the wild petunia, or butterfly weed, which is a milkweed, and it's the supermodel of milkweeds. You can see how beautiful and orange it is. It's super attractive. Ask yourself, is your area wet or dry? Is it wet only after rain? Or maybe there's water that puddles there for a while, and then in the middle of summer it gets bone dry. Or maybe it's dry altogether and it drains really quickly. Those are important questions because there is always the right plant for the right habitat. So if your area is really wet, maybe you'll want to plant an iris. Those are so beautiful. Look how graceful that plant is. Or maybe you want to do turtle head. It's a host plant for the checker spot, I believe, or is it one of the butterflies? And in the dry area, you can put things like royal catchfly, one of very few red flowers. It will attract hummingbirds. Or the green milkweed, short green milkweed, which is maybe not a showy plant, but it has an interesting structure, right? And then think what is already out there. I am not asking you to start digging out your dahlias and your roses and other plants and changing everything to a native garden. Think what you have there and where you can fit a few native plants. And this is a picture of my mom's house, from in front of my mom's house, who used to garden only with traditional plants that you get at Home Depot. And because she can't say no to native plant or to any plants really, it's genetic in our family. I started giving her some native plants and she started incorporating those. And right now she has a beautiful mix of native and traditional plants throughout her garden. So in here you can see there's a lot of American tall bellflower and black-eyed Susan. She has areas where she has asters, and she has areas where she mixes the asters with goldenrod. So she has the blue-purple going with yellow in the fall. It's really pretty. We might see some more pictures from her yard later on. And then consider if you're planting in a small area or a large area. There isn't really an area that's too small. On top here, you have a picture from the Rice Native Gardens outside of the Field Museum. So this is now our biggest exhibit space with almost 100,000 square feet of native gardens all around. They're open to the public. They're free to walk around, look at wildlife in there. So design for that garden will be a lot different than if you have a small patio, like on the picture on the bottom, where you might have some of your traditional plants, but see this person incorporated a rose milkweed right there. And that's fine. You can fit a native plant somewhere. And then dry your plant. And we're gonna go back to that. Dry your plant because this is where your thinking will happen. You can see on top, this is my colleague's garden, literally on the back of some other handouts. Because this is where you're going to think, do I have this? Do I have that? Does this plant really like this habitat? Or maybe it gets a little shadier here and wet over there. You can put it on paper and then pick what plants go in there. And if you don't have ideas, that's fine. There are so many different examples out there. And some of them I think were shared with you, but you can just Google native plant layouts and many will be shared with you. And those are usually really cool. And you have bigger ones, smaller ones for different habitats, etc. So as you're, now you know the conditions in your garden, you know what you're going for. I would really ask you to consider diversity. And when I mean diversity, I mean different types of diversity. So it's not only the number of plants you have, but that is important. But I would also like you to think of phenological diversity, when things bloom. You should have something blooming in your garden from now all the way through October into November maybe. So some things that are blooming now or soon. On top of there, we have golden Alexanders. That's a host plant for the swallowtails. Virginia bluebells, which are going strong in my garden. Shooting star will be coming in May. And sand coreopsis, beautiful plants. For midsummer, you can have butterfly weed, blazing star, nodding onion. If you want a short plant that does well with gardens, nodding onion is it. It's very beautiful how it nods the flower hat and it's graceful with white and light pink or lilac flowers. Yellow coneflowers or wild bergamot. And for the fall, try ironweed. beautiful purple. And there's different types of ironweeds, from about 4-foot tall common ironweed to 8-foot tall giant or tall ironweed that makes a beautiful backdrop for things. You have New England aster, heath aster, or showy goldenrods. People don't like goldenrods because some of those goldenrods people think give you allergies. It's not the goldenrod that gives you allergies. It is ragweed that blooms at about the same time. And I wasn't convinced about goldenrods for a long time. Part of it is you've heard I've done large scale restorations where goldenrods, although native, sometimes can be a problem. And I spent good time sighting those and cutting them. But I've been reading everywhere how goldenrods are such workhorses in gardens and also for pollinators. There's about 100 different types of solitary, so non-stinging native bees that rely on goldenrod specifically for pollen. And I've been thinking, okay, like, I'm not convinced, but the science is out. I should plant few goldenrods. So in one of my garden patches, I have smooth blue aster and goldenrod, and I put them together. And last October, I was giving one of those shorter talks on gardening with native plants, and I sat outside in front of my garden, and I could literally feel the plants buzzing and vibrating because there were so many bumblebees on them, and it was incredible. So now I'm a convert. Please include goldenrod in your plantings, and it is being offered at the native plant sale, as are New England aster, and I think aromatic aster and sky blue aster. Those are really good plants, and that blue and yellow or purple and yellow combination in the fall is really beautiful. So bloom time, you want to have something blooming at all times. And it's okay if you don't know, right? If this is the year when you're starting, take note, observe your garden on a weekly basis or daily, and note, like, it's July 5th, nothing is blooming or just one plant is blooming. And then that will help you for next year find a plant that will fit fill that gap in blooming time. Consider form and function. So those are the different roles that a plant plays. So for example, you can have grasses and sedges. These are often overlooked because we just want beautiful plant. Grasses and sedges are also plants and they're also flowering. But we want forms. What do we consider grasses? Flowers. But grasses, they add a lot of structure. Sedges, a lot of times, don't spread like crazy, and if they do, they provide good ground cover, so there's less weeding for you down the line. They keep moisture in the soil. They're really pretty, and right now all the sedges are green, so as things are greening up, you can have this sea of greenery. So I would consider that. There's different types of sedges. There's a lot of sedges for shady areas, or grasses. There's grasses for shady and full sun areas. From wet to dry, you can find something for everyone. Consider having shrubs in your garden, and those could be big shrubs. Willows are a great shrub because they are blooming now. So when our queen bumblebees are waking up and they need that nectar, shrubs are it a lot of times. So willows, but also maybe June berries, service berries, a lot of different shrubs. What I have here is aromatic sumac on the bottom and lead plant on top. And lead plant is a small shrub. It will be about knee high at the most, but it's a good shrubby plant to have in your garden. And then think to have different shapes and colors that benefit different species. And the reason for that is a lot of our insects are attracted to a different shape or a different color at a different time of the year because their life cycles are matching. So by having a variety, not like only white things in spring, but having a variety, you will attract more things. And you know how the saying goes, build it and they will come. So hopefully that will happen for you as well. And also, it adds beauty. Then when you're buying your plants, don't do what I did the first time I was gardening with native plants. I was like, I love these 20 species. I'm going to get one of each. Don't do that. Get fewer types of plants, but buy 3 to 7 of each and clump them together. And that's for a few different reasons. One, they will look better because they will be fuller, there'll be more of them, they'll be more noticeable. Two, if one of them dies, that's okay because the other ones sort of will fill in. And three, native insects it's easier for them actually to notice if you have plants in clumps, which sort of blows my mind, but that's true. One thing that you might want to do is if you, for example, are planting bluebells, which are beautiful, you can put them in a clump, but if you know bluebells, they will disappear in a few months. You will not be able to see their leaves at all. So you can intersperse those with some other things that sort of bloom later in the season. So maybe some sort of a smaller goldenrod or aster, a rough blazing star or something else. But yeah, clumping them together. Someone tells me that odd number is better than even number because how our brain comprehends things. I'm not convinced about that, but 3 to 7 plants. Then get creative with your cover and have fun with it. On the bottom there, you will see is a native garden that I planted for friends last year. And the plants, some of them are bigger in the back because that was done 2 months ahead of the rest of it. But they had fun. The garden is going to have sort of formal design, although it's done with native plants, but they had fun with that whimsical path and they want to grow some short grasses or sedges in between. So it would have like a sort of a fairy magical feel to it. So have fun with that. Add maybe some bird baths, not too many though, or maybe some logs or structures, and use edging. Edging does few things. If someone who doesn't know native plants mows the lawn around, they'll know where to stop. But it also tells people who might not be familiar with native plants, hey, this is intentional. This is supposed to be here. And they will have a greater appreciation for it. And then finally, certify your garden. There's so many different ways to put a sign or certify your garden, from homemade signs that you can see in the top right picture to really regional ones. For us here, it's Conservation at Home, to having national ones like Monarch Way Station or Pollinator Habitat, through Xerces or through National Wildlife Federation. So you can do a whole bunch of different certificates. And I think wild ones now have signs as well that should say this is a native garden. And this does a few things. Again, it tells people that this is intentional. You might not be familiar with this plant, but it's here on purpose, although it has weed in its name, like Joe Pine wheat, for example. But it also, is a good education tool and a good conversation starter. Because people, when there's a sign, are more likely to ask you questions about it as you're working in your garden. And then draw out your plan. You can have all these points on there. And as you're writing your plant list or drawing it out, you're like, oh, I forgot grasses. Where do I put them? Or, oh, I should add a shrub. Or, oh, it looks like I have nothing blue in there. So those are good things. And it's much easier to go through the checklist if you are drawing your plan. Also helps if you're drawing to scale. I mean, it doesn't have to be inch by inch, but I like to use grid paper. And if you don't have grid paper, you can make it easily, with a ruler, piece of paper, or just print it out from online. And a lot of these plants can be purchased at your native plant sale with the Wild Ones Prairie, Illinois Prairie chapter. So do look for this. Go look through the plants, order your plants as soon as possible. I really encourage you. The cool thing about these type of sales is you are always dealing with knowledgeable people who are passionate about this. They will answer your questions. They might give you more information than you're hoping for. But native plants are hard to get. And once the native plants plant sales are done, it's really hard to buy plants, except if you want to buy them in large quantities. Then you can buy them wholesale or maybe some mixed ones. But if you want like just 3 plants of this and 4 plants of that, native plant sales are the way to go. And you've done the first step. You're here. You're already planning. If you're trying to look for other plant suggestions, you can Google Native Plant Finder, and it'll take you to National Wildlife Foundation's website where you put in your zip code, and then it'll give you over 100 different plants that are good for your zip code. And then you'll be overwhelmed, probably. So you can look at some other things. We create these field guides at Field Museum. You can go to fieldguide.fieldmuseum.org. And one is creating monarch habitat in Midwestern Garden. So it just gives you some plants to plant for the monarch. And we are updating that. So a new one to look forward to. But also do refer back to the native plant sale list. And then there are some websites, and I don't want to advertise any specific a native plant retailer, but a lot of them do have good information on there. I do like Prairie Moon because you can say you want dry, full sun plant that blooms in May, and they'll give you different options. That doesn't mean you have to buy from them, but it's a really good resource. I really should get kickbacks from them for recommending them. So native plant, that was a joke, by the way. It's hard to read audience with Zoom. So some lessons that I've learned from native plant and gardening with native plants is, that's a saying someone else shared with me. Native plants sleep, creep, and leaf. First year you plant them, your native plants might not be blooming. They are really busy putting those really long roots in the ground, making sure they can survive winter to pop up back again next year. And that's fine. It'll take them a year or two, or maybe 3. My Michigan lily bloomed for the first time, I think, year 3 or 4. But then they will flourish, and then they will start spreading. And if your native plants aren't happy where they're at, maybe it's not the best spot for them. Try to find them in your home. Dig them up. Just make sure you get a lot of the root and transplant them, and that's fine. You're learning about the space with the plants, and the plants are a great indicator to tell you what's going on there. If you are establishing a native plant garden, it's different than having a prairie, and it's much different if you're planting from seeds versus plugs or seedlings. So with seeds, a lot of times you mix all the seeds and you spread it together, and it's a beautiful chaos. I mean, I think prairies are beautiful. And if that's what you're going for, that's fine. I would love to go for that. A lot of us have that aesthetic that we like things clumped and we like them in a specific way. Or maybe you are in some HOA, some homeowners association, and has to be, presentable. So if you are doing it from seed, which is a lot more cost effective, it will take longer. It will be bushier. It will be harder to weed because unless you know what baby plants look like. So I would recommend starting with plugs, especially if you're a beginner. Now, if you have played along with it, maybe start from seeds, but you can also start the seeds in containers. And there's a lot, you can do pre-stratification, you can do winter sowing, and then transplant those plants into your garden. If you are using very tall plants, use them by fences or buildings or in the center of a larger spot. If you have a tiny place and there's not much of a fence or a building, don't use large plants because they will just look not proportional. This is one of the mistakes I made my first time around. This is a patch I planted along a fence, tiny Chicago lots. It was about a foot of soil along a pathway, and the neighbor next door was okay, but we wanted some privacy, so I planted a lot of tall plants. But what I did, I planted them at one side, and I planted medium height plants, and then tall plants again. So you can totally do the tall plants, but then commit to tall plants only. If you mix them up on a tiny, narrow strip like that, that doesn't look good. So if you have a small space, commit to a height, and you will always go between, a few inches this way or that way. But if you go only with tall plants, it can look a little messy. I mean, I like that look, but a lot of people would, this was not a seller to convince people to garden with native plants. Unless they were birders and they would see the amount of finches and other things that would come in. And this is the same garden from a different perspective. So you can see the tall up front and the tall in the back and the middle with medium height. And that wasn't the most aesthetically pleasing. So I learned from that. Think about what flowers look good together. I've been talking a little bit about the blue and the yellow, or the purple and the yellow. And that's the asters and goldenrods in the fall. And if you're anywhere artsy, which I'm not, but complementary colors are good. So if you have yellow, you want a secondary color that doesn't have yellow in it, which is purple, because it has blue and red. And that's supposed to be pleasing to our senses. So asters and goldenrods figure that out for us. If you do have persistent invasive plants and they're inhibiting your establishment of native plants, try to herbicide. Sometimes pulling some plants is not successful, and I'm thinking of Canada thistle. If that gets into your garden and you let it get away from you, which is easy to do, especially if you have a larger garden, that might be really hard to deal with. And I say that knowing that there'll be some outrage, we shouldn't use pesticide, but I'm not saying nuke your whole yard. You can use pesticide very judiciously, just in the areas that's needed. And if you don't want to do that, that's fine. I do come from a background of large-scale restoration where hand pulling is not always necessary. So you do, or possible. So you do use the tools in your toolbox, but like with any tool, you want to do it responsibly. Avoid pre-made mixes. That goes back to the same thing of, prairie from seed versus plugs. And prairie plants will droop because they're going to lean towards the sun, which is fine. But if you have those really tall plants, sometimes you need to either tie them to a pole or to, like on this picture here, you see them being tied to a railing because, yeah, they'll droop. And that might be okay in your garden design, or maybe you're getting direct sunlight into them. But if there's some shade, or they might be getting more sunlight a few feet away, they'll go for it. And it is important to monitor your plants during establishment, seeing if they're happy, seeing if like, this is a fourth leaf I lost from this plant, and maybe it is too wet in here for it after all. And I find a lot of joy in that. And then, make your garden look purposeful, especially if you're worried about your neighbors. So those are the signs, those are the edgings, some art around it, maybe rocks or logs that show that, yes, I'm doing this on purpose. So, a few ideas for a garden setup in case you're trying. So if you have a sidewalk and a small area along the fence, you always want to look where the sun is or where your north is. And the fence is on top of this picture, so you're like, oh, okay, the garden is on the north end. But if you really have your back to the fence, you're south facing. So think about that, because the sun exposure will make a difference. If you're unsure how that's going to work with your property, because it's at a weird angle, if you download Google Earth, there is a way to play around with the settings to actually see how the sun works and where the shade falls on your property. You can zoom in. So that's a possibility. So with a fence, you don't want to do too many different species. With every color star is a different species. You want to maybe do something taller in the back and something really short up front, because you're going to have this sidewalk. And you don't want anything super tall that will be drooping or leaving its stems down. So do try to get some of your shorter species by the sidewalk. I really love Ciceranthium, the blue-eyed grass. They're clumpy, they're beautiful. They will spread with time. Nutting onion is a good one. If that part by the sidewalk is fairly wide, you can do northern dropseed, which is a grass. My mom calls it the volcano grass because it sort of does this volcano thing. Sedges are good. Some of those plants that stay evergreen, like prairie smoke, is really great. Pussytoes, which is a good spring ephemeral and a host plant to the American lady butterfly. Try those along the sidewalk. If you are looking at maybe adding a patch in the central of your lawn, which I've seen that those look nice. If you have a large front lawn, you might have a low accent, actually triangular, square, whatever shape you want. With that, you know, do the tall things in the middle. And there's few what I like to call prairie skyscrapers, so really, really tall plants. Some of those might be your silphiums, so that's compass plant, prairie dock, or rosinweed. Prairie dock actually the leaf stays about, I would say knee to mid thigh high, but then it springs up bolts up a really long stem with a beautiful yellow flower at the end. Those are super nice. And they can break up your garden design fairly well. Giant ironweed is another one. Joe pieweed is tall. So adding some of those tall ones in the middle is an option, but you don't have to do it. You can then have things increasing at a decreasing scale, so shorter things with each sort of ring or design. Now think about it, if you have something, to have something blooming that will look nice throughout the time. So maybe if you have those tall late summer bloomers in the middle, maybe that yellow should be your early summer, late spring blooming things. And the blue dots around there, those could be your sedges, or maybe some of those shorter plants that I just mentioned that do well by a sidewalk. But you can do that similar design, not in circles or elliptical, but maybe just sort of like a race out of the possibly tall plants in the middle. And then if you're having an area around the house, make sure you do edging, especially if it's in front of your house. Or, sometimes also just mulch will let people know where the grass ends and the garden begins. And then you can play with designs. The two sides of your centerpiece don't have to be the same, but try to have something blooming. Sometimes if you have a lot of sedges and you want them to add spring color, I garden with a 90% native plants, but I do have a soft spot for the spring bulbs. So I do have plenty of crocuses in my garden, some daffodils and tulips, and non-native irises because I'm just a sucker for them. But those are some good ones to put in there, and then they'll disappear later in the season when other prairie plants become the stars of your garden. So now you have your garden. How do you maintain it in a way that doesn't eat up your whole day, but also in a way that is good for pollinators? Because we're doing this for many different reasons, right? We're doing it for beauty, but we're also doing it to preserve and store carbon to try to ameliorate the effects of climate change. We're doing this to help pollinators, to help the monarch or the rusty-patched bumblebee, or a bunch of other things. So how do you maintain your garden in a way that will help all these little creatures that will call it home? So first of all, it's allow yourself to be a little lazy and leave your garden a little messy. You can leave dead plant material in your garden year round. So the picture above is from in front of my house last year at about this time. And you can see I have leaves in there from the year before. And if you had that garden itch last week when it was so nice and warm, I don't blame you, but it's going to be like 32 degrees soon. And then inevitably, we're going to get that end of April snow. So if you're really hoping with your garden to boost native bee populations or have more lightning bugs in your yard for your kids and grandkids to play with, leaving those leaves is really important. The leaves are a blanket on the soil, and when the bumblebees or other bees make home in the soil, 70% of our bees are ground nesters. Those leaves will allow them to sort of have a blanket and be protected. Also, the leaves, many things eat the decaying matter, and then there's many things that eat the things that eat the decaying matter. So it's a circle of life in there. So if you do like your lightning bugs in the larval stage are super voracious, and they live in that leaf habitat in there. So I get it. If you have neighbors that will be complaining or will think you're sloppy, then you can have a mullet garden. Have your business up front where you clean your leaves and have the party in the back. The leaves, my husband was making fun of me last fall. I would rake the leaves from in front of our house, throw it over the fence, and spread them underneath a big evergreen that came with the house where there's nothing growing underneath. I'm like, okay, little critters, have a good winter. And the leaves are there and they're slowly decaying and it's okay. And we're mimicking nature. So the bottom picture is a field of bloodroot, and look what it's growing in. It is growing in leaves. So you are putting more nutrients into the soil. You are creating habitat. You're being a little lazy, which is okay. This is another one of my mom's backyard gardens. So you can see that the purple are ironweed, and then she has the yellow in there and the white, and looks really beautiful. And she has some traditional plants incorporated in there as well. Do not cut all the plants. I know we really want to, clean up our garden in the fall, but there are things that live in those plants. So leaving about 1.5 feet of standing stems for winter will create a habitat for them, will give them home. So what you are looking at right here is a picture from our Rice Native Gardens at the Field Museum. And you can see we're a large cultural institution, and we are not cleaning up our garden for winter. So we're hoping we're going to be a good example for others around the city, and also to, be an example and sort of stick it to some of the municipal laws that tell us that garden plants can only be 10 inches tall. So leaving that creates a lot of habitat and overwintering grounds for burrowing insects, but also insects that might have left a chrysalis or an egg in those plants to overwinter to emerge again in the spring. That's totally fine. Do it. And then again, don't clean up your garden too early, because your native plants will poke through the leaves. You can see the picture on the bottom. There's native plants poking through there. And our insects need 10 or more consecutive days of temperatures above 50 degrees to really wake up from hibernation. So a lot of times, we're at about like 6 or 7, and then the temperature drops. Just let them be, wait, and then you can clean your garden if you really have to. Another thing that I would ask people to do is allow for the natural predator-prey cycle to take place. So what's a predator-prey cycle? I'll give you an example with rabbits, right? You have too many rabbits, and that year your coyote population is really happy because it has a good meal. So within a few weeks, that or maybe next year rather, there's a lot less rabbits because the coyotes were happy, they ate them. There's also a lot more coyotes, so they're eating the rabbits again, and the rabbit population decreases. So it's the same thing with different bugs in our garden, except the cycle is much quicker because they're insects and not many year-lived animals. So if you see a lot of aphids in your garden and you want to spray them with pesticides, I would ask you not to do that, because whatever you do to harm one insect harms the insects you want to help. So it harms the butterflies or the dragonflies or the bumblebees, whichever you're hoping to bring. There isn't an insecticide that is just good for one type of insect. It affects them all. But if you wait for 2 weeks, lady beetles will come and they'll lay their eggs, and their larvae are super voracious. So if you can see this picture here, the big long bug is actually a larvae of the lady beetle, and you can see there's a few other lady beetles here in different stages, and they're going to eat the aphids away. So don't worry, the aphids are going to be gone. Give it 2 weeks. And then if it doesn't help, maybe there's something you can do. Just try to wait for a little bit. In order to help a lot of pollinators, we have to give them food, but also opportunities for shelter. And 70% of our native bees are solitary and do not sting, nest in bare ground. So leave some bare ground for them. Don't mulch everything. And I get it. The first year I plant a garden, I mulch because it will keep moisture in. It will suppress the weeds. I try not to use cider mulch because that will scare insects off. But I do try to leave some areas maybe closer to the building that aren't mulch. And then I try not to reapply mulch year after year. The first year's mulch disintegrate, and that will allow plants to move in. As you're leaving a lot more, as you're allowing for the mulch to be on the ground and then to decay, that's the time as it decays that the plants will start flourishing. They've already invested in their roots and they want to start spreading. So when they spread and there's mulch, it's hard for them to do. If they drop seeds, it's hard for them for that seed to germinate because there's mulch. So mulch in the first year, but then give yourself a break, give your wallet a break, and let the bees have some home. And then, there's a lot of vogue now in using bee hotels. And I mean, the idea behind it is great. 30% of our bees, like mason bees and leaf cutter bees, use these cavities. So you can buy bee hotels where supposedly the bees will lay eggs, and they will. And it's a good resource. But also think of it this way: if you're a parasitic wasp, or if you're a disease of sorts, and you find a bee hotel like that, you've hit the jackpot because you have a condensed area of a lot of food right there. So there's a few things you can do. If you do have bee hotels, make sure they're the ones where you can exchange the middle. You can create ones or buy ones even on Etsy, where you exchange the straws every year. But you can also just let logs rot, have some logs and drill holes into them. And then don't have big ones. If you want to have bee hotels, have small ones, but many of them spread throughout. But just cutting your stems and letting them stay not just for 1 year, but for multiple years will help with that. I thought I had a graphic here. So for example, if I last fall, in fall 2020, I caught, late fall, getting ready for winter, I deadheaded a lot of my native plants, the ones that most of the seeds were gone, so birds weren't using them. Left them anywhere between 8 and 24 inches in different heights. A bee will come this year, potentially put an egg inside of the hollow stem, or that egg will overwinter, and it won't be until next spring, so spring of 2022, that bees will emerge from it. So what happens if I this year cut last year's stems out and throw them out? I'm potentially throwing out those bee eggs. So whatever you do this fall, so fall of 2021, in spring of 2023, that's where the bees will emerge. So you're playing the long game here. And then really observe your garden and take joy in it. and notice when things are in bloom, when things aren't blooming. I started, this is dorky, but I now started I have a notebook just for my garden where I have the designs for my garden. We just took out a high cranberry bush, so I'll be adding more. And that helps me with a few things. It keeps track of what I plant and how many of which. It tells me where I planted it because I always think I'm going to remember. And it's hardly ever the case, you know. And then if you're having issues identifying things, baby plants, as they come up in spring, this is a great resource to go back and be like, "Whew, okay, looks like I planted Zizia here. So this actually, that's Golden Alexander, sorry. So this actually might be it." So having that, and the designs I have in my notebook are not to scale. But, you know, I have different colors, and then I have things under, and I like to know what is blooming when, just to keep track of it, because I guess I'm nerdy. Then do weed when necessary. Your garden will get weeds, and if you need to, please weed. And then perhaps you have to cull some plants, so maybe you have to dig them up, thin them out, cut them, and then maybe tie them. The picture on the right is a ironweed, and I have 2 stakes in the ground and I tie it together because it just scrolls a little bit, doesn't look as great, and we have a walking path right there, so I tie it between those 2. But it's okay to thin your native plants with time. It's a great thing to, you know, if you have a new neighbor coming in, put them in pots, give it to your neighbor, give it to someone else, start a community pollinator garden by school, church, park, library. And you can do that with extra plants from your garden with time. And then participate in community science. What is community science? Pretty much is also named called citizen science sometimes. It is for a way for everyday individuals to contribute to the body of knowledge. Scientists cannot be everywhere all the time. We would spend a lot of time driving, and it's people who and their observations who help us understand the natural world. So I'm going to do a big plug-in for Field Museum's Monarch Community Science Project. We ask people to look at milkweed plants they have in their garden, either one. I mean, there's so many different ones. We can do whichever one you have. In a patch, observe them once a week. So pick a patch where you don't have, 100 milkweed plants, because that will take a long time. But once a week, and count the number of eggs and caterpillars. What we're trying to do is determine what makes a successful monarch patch in an urban space. And that could be also suburban and exurban. But that's what we're trying to figure out, because we're unsure. We sort of have an idea in natural areas, and I say sort of, but in a garden setting, not so much. And if you go to bit.ly, so bit.ly/monarch monitors, all small letters, you can sign up for a newsletter. We have retrainings coming in on Zoom in May. There'll be more in June. So come join us. Your data will help us learn what's happening out there. But we are by far not the only community science project. Project Budburst from Chicago Botanic Garden has one on phenologies. We're looking at cultivars, which are native cultivars of native plants, also known as nativars, versus straight species. Native species, seeing which ones benefit pollinators more. There's one on phenology where you can register what's blooming when and where. There are complicated community science projects and ones that are one-off. One is iNaturalist, which is a great app where you can just take a picture of any living organism, try to identify it, but there's other community scientists who will try to help you with identification. And it's great because you're contributing to a lot of data, but you're also getting more familiar with the area around you. So you really, you don't have to do ARM on our community science project, but I do really recommend that you get involved in something. And it's a really fun thing to get the kids involved. to get them excited about science, excited about nature, excited about, digging in dirt and finding out more about the natural world. And if you're having a balcony or a patio or a small space as the only space where you can garden, that is fine. And a lot of the same rules will follow. You just might need to water a lot more. Pick species that are not too tall so they don't get knocked over. And then get creative combining veggies and native plants. I sort of started that last year. You can see I have a vervain here with some climbing sweet peas. And let us know how that goes. We get a lot of questions about native plants and container gardens, and we'd love to have more data about that. So just to sort of wrap everything up, in the fall, when growing season is ending, collect seeds, or leave some for winter bird food. Be lazy and don't rake everything. Plant shrubs. Fall is a good time for that. Ensure something is blooming through October and submit any community science data that you might have. In winter, we're in spring, but this is the time to start thinking of your additions to the garden, gathering some information. If you're going to start seeds to germinate them, this is the time to purchase seeds. And look for that winter interest in your garden from all those plants that you left by not cutting them. In spring, don't clean your garden until it's 10 or more days, consecutive days of temperatures above 50. Sow your stratified seeds. If that's what you chose to do, record first blooming plants. Ensure that something is blooming now in April. And look for community science projects to participate in during the summer. And then visit natural areas during the summer to get ideas, how you can garden with native plants. Notice if you have any blooming gaps. Chat with pollinators, visit your garden, and then do weed cull or thin native plants as needed. And those are some resources, but a lot of them were emailed to you. So I just want to thank you now for your patience and for listening to me for an hour. I'm going to stop sharing the screen and we can open this to questions.
Thank you so much, Isa. We do have a few questions that people have added to chat, and as we are answering questions, please add more questions to chat. So as you were talking about mulch for the first year, is there a particular brand or type of mulch that you recommend that people should use?
I've heard from many people now not to use cider mulch because it will say it repels mosquitoes, which is true, but also will repel everything else. And if mosquitoes are your worry, I understand, right? Like mosquitoes carry disease, they're inconvenient, but also having a fan out by your deck can keep mosquitoes away if it's not a windy day. I don't think they can fly above anything 6 or 8 miles per hour. So having a fan on low setting will keep mosquitoes away and also keep you cooler. But I try to use natural mulch. Some people really like the colored mulch because it does because they like the contrast or whatever. That's your preference. My idea is the less additives, the better. It's usually like same with food, the fewer ingredients your food has, the better for you. But let's not be judgmental. And it's okay. If your neighbor has red mulch, we can live with that.
Okay, another question that we have, we got a few questions actually this afternoon before the program started. One of our members asked, I have an oak savanna covered in grass. How do you eliminate the grass or prepare the area for native planting under trees?
Ooh, good question. I wonder which grasses do they have? Do they have like lawn grass or do they have native grasses? There's few ways, depending also on your scale, right? When you say oak savanna, I'm thinking it's at least like an acre, maybe a little more, or maybe I'm mistaken. Disking the grass can work. but you need to have equipment for that. But removing lawn can be done a few ways. If you have a relatively small place, actually a good shovel and a wheelbarrow will work fine. Once you get the angle going, you'll move quickly. You can also go to places like Home Depot, Lowe's, Menards, and their pool rental has sod remover. So they will remove the grass with like an inch or so of soil, and that could work for larger areas. If you have like an acre, that's too much of land to do that. Disking, you might, start small. You might want to kill off the grass if it's lawn grass. So that can be done a few ways. You can put black plastic bags or cardboard to choke out the grass, or you can use glyphosate. So that's Roundup herbicide to kill it, give it some time to rest. However, if you're killing it, you're also killing microbes and fungi that are in the ground. So, there's pluses and minuses depending on your scale. And then if you have a large area, that is perhaps when you try seeding. If you're thinking you're gonna, because when you open up that area, you can get a lot of weeds coming in. It's, something will occupy it. It's like real estate. Someone will want to get in. So on the large scale restoration, sometimes what we did in an area where we knew weeds would be a big problem, we seeded some non-aggressive grasses. So for a savanna, the rice that would be good would be Canada wild rye for the sunnier areas, Virginia wild rye for the sort of shadier areas, along with silky rye. And those grasses come in fairly easily, but then when you want to put in your forbs, they'll give way to the forbs. Some of our late blooming warm season grasses like big blue stem Indian grass, switchgrass, once they take over, it's really hard to get anyone else or anything else established. So there's some hemiparasitic plants that people like woodbeckie use to sort of suppress the grasses and allow others to flourish. And that's probably more than you wanted to know. So I'm sorry.
No, that's great. Another question that we got this afternoon is, are you familiar with winter sowing using containers? And if so, have you done it with success?
Yeah, so the winter sowing with containers is you take old containers like milk jugs are really great. You punch some holes in the bottom, you put soil, you moisten the soil, you plant the seeds, you put the top, duct tape it around, make sure you label what you put in there, both inside and outside. And you let it be and maybe water once every 3 weeks or so. And then the top of the jug or sort of serves as a mini greenhouse and will speed up. I've had big success in that, potentially because I am not as patient as I should be. What I do like to do is stratify seeds, and I usually do either sand or vermiculite. I know people do paper towels, but that always has molded for me. And again, maybe I'm not doing it right. I do stratify with vermiculite. Vermiculite is really forgiving. It absorbs moisture well. And then I use old food containers. So like, your strawberry containers, I fill those with soil. They already have holes. They drain well. And plant the seeds on there. And put them on the window. I have a small greenhouse, so I grow them in the greenhouse. And then when the true leaves are appearing, so not your first leaves, but your true leaves, and the plants seem like a little more robust, then I pop them into larger cell containers. But I know people who swear by the milk jug method. It looks like Mary has a question. She has
so I just wanted to let everyone know that we are not unmuting people to ask questions. So Mary, if you could put your question in chat. And I am going to do a quick screen share here with some of our chapter information if anyone is interested in that, but we'll continue to take questions as we are doing the screen share here. So we also had several people asking about where to buy native plants. I did share previously the link in our chapter website. You mentioned Prairie Moon, but are there other areas, other growers that you would recommend for bulk buying?
You can go to Illinois Native Plant Society's website, so that's illinoisplants.org. And under resources, they will have native plant sales as well as nurseries. And those are good. You guys aren't in my region exactly, so I bet there are some good regional providers. Just make sure you ask the growers a few things. Ask them where they collected seed from, whether that seed was, harvested in a proper way, or maybe they purchased the seed, which is totally fine. If the plant is super rare, ask them how they propagated that. I mean, they won't give you the details, but if they're sketchy, chances are they might be small, but those plants are poached, and that's meaning like stolen from native natural areas. That's two things. A, that's bad for natural areas, and B, chances are they won't survive in your garden. And those might be like rare plants, definitely orchids, native orchids, stuff like that. But check out Native Plant Society's website. It's a great organization. It has chapters throughout Illinois. They do native plant walks. And then, like, I think membership is only $20 or $25. It's totally affordable. And a lot of information. Good folks. It's all volunteer run. I can recommend it enough.
Okay. Yeah, okay, I'm unmuted. I wasn't sure if I was muted or not. So Florence made a comment saying that she left leaves on her native gardens, but the voles actually ate absolutely everything. Is that typical? Do you have any recommendations to deal with voles, or did they really eat everything and maybe not everything has come up yet? Maybe it's still there, but it hasn't come up yet.
A lot of things have not come up yet. Like milkweeds will not come up until mid-May. Last year, I think my butterfly weed came up like June 3rd. So things are still waking up slowly. I don't know if I have to be honest, I'm not sure if the leaves would make the voles even more. I don't have much experience with that. So my apologies. Maybe like call up your local hawks to eat the voles. And I'm kidding. I am not sure. My apologies. I mean, they'll definitely love tubers, right? And if it's not the voles, it might be the squirrels. Something will come after those tasty bits of food.
Yeah, that is unfortunate sometimes when that happens. So Mary's question, she wrote in chat, was that I have ground elder that is invading my plantings. How do I get rid of it? Or how can I plant lots of other natives hoping to crowd it out?
That is a good question. A lot of times with plants overall, if you don't want to use chemicals, which is fine, cutting it at the most vulnerable time is good. So when the plants go into flower, cutting it then is a successful thing. And we do that with goldenrods because the plants have put in so much effort into producing the flower that cutting it then a lot of times doesn't allow it to come back, or it can take a lot more effort out of the roots and a lot more energy to regrow the plant. And I definitely think trying to crowd it out, maybe do that for a year or two and then try to crowd it out with some native plants, and also with native plants that sprawl. So if it's a shady area, that's like wild ginger will sprawl. Sedges are always good, and sedges, you can plant forbs in between. The sedges will not take over. But don't have experience with elder. Sorry.
Okay. Thanks for that, though. That was really great. We have a question from Richard and Jessica. What are some good available early blooming plants for first-time native gardeners? So what would you recommend?
I would bluebells because they're beautiful and they just bring so much joy. If you can have trilliums, those are cool because they're some of the first things that will bloom. Some of Zizia or the golden Alexanders, that's like late spring, but they're the host plant for the swallowtails. Also your dill and parsley and cilantro, they'll eat that as well. But golden Alexanders has a really cool seed head, and that seed head, the seeds stay on the plant for a long time, and I like that a lot. I love pussy toes, and those also are a good ground cover. And pussy toes are a host plant for the American lady and the painted lady butterflies. And if the leaves look like they're getting dried and curled, that means there's a caterpillar in there and eating them. So don't freak out. And you know, someone once told me that if nothing is eating your garden, something's wrong with it. So we're planting it so things can eat it. Shooting stars are absolutely beautiful. Bloodroot, if you can get it to establish, those are great. Bloodroot is just such a like snow white, beautiful plant that will pop in color. Either if it's against like the black of soil, the leaves, or the green. They're just gorgeous. For later spring, also wild columbine. Those are taller. They will attract hummingbirds, and that's a really pretty plant as well. But I think your list actually has a very good detailed. I don't know that it says on the list itself which ones are spring ephemerals, but I think your Facebook, or not your Facebook, your website, you can buy by category. So I would consult that as well. Prairie smoke, that's another one. I have a lot of favorites.
Yeah. There are so many beautiful spring flowers. Well, lots of beautiful flowers throughout the entire growing season. Well, that looks like that is the end of our questions that we have. So Isa, thank you so much for taking the time this evening to share all of your knowledge with us and all of the resources that you provided, where we can find out more information about plantings and different plants and designs and things like that. So thank you everyone for joining us, and
thank you for having me.
Yeah.
And yeah, take joy in your gardens. You know, plant it and they will definitely come.